Salutation statistic supporters. This is a Stats MR returning with another presentation to sleep through. I will be discussing a topical topic. There's been a lot of news around the last year or so about inflation rates increasing and interest rates increasing. So tonight I'll be discussing the interest rates and inflation rates by countries. Where are they the highest? And then I'll also compare the interest rate to the inflation rate. Now, in presenting the statistics, the interest rate countries set usually is the overnight rate that banks borrow from each other. It's not the interest rate that banks give to depositors for term accounts or savings accounts. So move in tandem. So if the overnight rate that a central bank sets increases, then usually the rates depositors receive from the bank will also increase in tandem. And similarly, if central banks cut the rates, then the rates depositors receive on their savings will usually decline. So it's an important distinction to make. Again, the description to my data source, and I'll also look at the debt to GDP ratio and see if there's any correlation between how much debt to GDP a country has versus how high their interest rates or inflation rates are. Okay, let's get into the data. Okay, so I'll go over the columns first. So column A is the name of the country. Column B is the most recent interest rate figure. Column C is the reference month for that most recent interest rate figure. Column D is the most recent inflation rate figure. Column E is the date of that inflation rate figure. Column F is a computed field, so I took the interest rate in column B and I subtracted the inflation rate in column D. So if the interest rate was higher than the inflation rate, it's positive. Whereas if the inflation rate in column D is greater than the interest rate in column B, then it's a negative figure. Column G is the debt to GDP ratio, so how much the national debt is divided by the GDP for the country. And again, debt is total debt, so all the deficits are surpluses, in the nation's history. Well, that's currently outstanding. And that's different than the deficit. The deficit is the debt for the current year, whereas the debt is the cumulative debt. And then the column H is the date of the recent GDP to or debt to GDP ratio. And here I did some correlations. So I looked at, okay, what's the correlation between the interest rates and the debt to GDP ratio? Because often, there will be arguments that a country can't increase their interest rates because the 0.15 correlation between the interest rates and the debt to GDP ratio, which is a fairly weak correlation. As a reminder, a -1 correlation, that means two variables are perfectly negatively correlated, so as one rises, the other falls. A correlation of 0 means there's 0 correlation between two variables, and a perfect correlation of 1 means as one variable increases, the second variable increases. So 0.15 is a fairly weak correlation between the debt to GDP ratio and interest rates. The next, I looked at the correlation between the inflation rate and the debt to GDP ratio. This was a stronger one, but again, it was if we round up to 0.4. So not that strong of a correlation between how much debt to GDP a country has and how much inflation they have. Now, as we scroll over, I also took the averages of the interest rates and the inflation. I've factored in the standard deviation, and then I found the outlier threshold. Now, to those familiar with z-scores, essentially to find an outlier. Now, there's debate. Some people will say an outlier is 3 standard deviations beyond the mean. Others say it's 2.5. I use 3, but again, that's get the mean or the average standard deviation. 3 times the standard deviation to find the outlier threshold. If there was an outlier, then I color-coded the cell maroon. And I did the same thing for the difference between the interest minus the inflation rate. Okay. Now let's scroll over and look at the data. Okay, so I'm going to sort this first by the interest rate from smallest to largest, and I'll do the same for the inflation and the debt to GDP ratio. So the country with the lowest interest rate is Japan at negative 0.1%, or negative 10 basis points, followed by Cape Verde at 0.25, Fiji, Cambodia. So those are the countries below 1%. Then it steadily rises to Switzerland, Thailand, Bulgaria, and it goes to Barbados, Seychelles, Cuba, Belize, Denmark, Botswana, Malaysia, up. The euro area is 3.5. That's another thing to point out. Some of the countries, I just listed the euro area because, and again, if there's any viewers watching this that live in the euro area, you can correct me if this is wrong, but I believe the European Central Bank sets the interest rates for the countries using the euro. So countries like Portugal, Spain, France, Luxembourg, that use the euro, they'd have their rate at 3.5. Okay, then if we want to go scroll all the way down, then it gets really high. So now Sri Lanka at 15.5, Kazakhstan at 16.75, Haiti at 17, Angola at 17, Mozambique at 17.25, Iran at 18, Malawi at 18, Nigeria at 18, Egypt at 18.25, Sierra Leone at 18.75, Pakistan at 21, Ukraine at 25, Sudan at 27.3, Ghana at 29.5. Now these 3 were outliers, so they were more than 3 standard deviations above the average. So Venezuela 56.97, Argentina at 81, and then Zimbabwe at 150. So those are the 3 outliers. followed by Macau, which, from my understanding, is just a special region within China. But then Seychelles at 0.91, Bahrain at 1.1, Brunei at 1.2, South Sudan at 1.3, Niger at 1.4, then Oman at 1.6, and Hong Kong, which again is a special region within China at 1.7, and Fiji at 2. Now if we scroll down to which, actually where's the Euro area? Interested to see what the Euro area is. Inflation rate is, Euro area is 6.9, so it's almost at 7 for the Euro area. Okay, now let's scroll all the way to the bottom. And again, these countries highlighted in maroon were outliers. So, have Argentina at 104% for the inflation, Venezuela at 156, and then Lebanon at 190. So that's where the inflation was the highest. Okay, now let's do another sort, and in this one we're going to sort by the debt to GDP ratio. See which countries have the highest debt to GDP ratio. Alright, so Brunei, debt to GDP ratio, so good, debt levels there. Kuwait at 7.1, Azerbaijan at 11.7, the Congo at 14.6, Burundi at 17.2. Now, let's scroll to the bottom. Which country has the highest? Okay, so the NA, some of the statistics were not available for the debt to GDP ratio for some of the countries. So if you see, well, now Macau and Hong Kong are regions within China, so that makes sense. Now for the highest debt to GDP ratio, so again you have United States at 129, Cape Verde at 130, Libya at 155, Singapore at 160, Lebanon at 172, Sudan at 182, Venezuela at 241, and then Japan is the highest at 262. Now we'll sort for between the interest rate and the inflation rate. So we're going to sort by interest rate minus inflation rate. Let's do largest to small. Let's see if we can get the best returns here. Okay. So again, this is the interest rate. It is greater than the inflation rate if it's positive. If it's negative, then the inflation is greater than the interest rate. So Zimbabwe is 62.4 to the positive. Then South Sudan is 10.7. Brazil at 9.1. Tajikistan is 7.4. Mozambique is 6.43. Angola 6.19. Ecuador 6.11. Liberia 5.88. Georgia 5.7. Armenia 5.35. Bahrain 4.64. Belarus 4.5, Mexico 4.4, Macau 4.39, Brunei 4.3, Russia at 4, Uruguay 3.92, Oman 3.9, Ukraine 3.7, Hong Kong 3.55, Guinea 3.39, Nigeria 3.35, Maldives 3.13, Jordan 3.09, Costa Rica 3.08. Is there any country remember that zero, or the interest rate and the inflation rate, are the same. Well, okay, so Namibia is close at 0.05. United States is 0. The UAE is negative 0.01. The Ivory Coast, negative 0.05. Alright, rate is far greater than the interest rate. So Iran is negative 35.4. Sudan is negative 36. Turkey is negative 42.01. Cuba is negative 42. Suriname is negative 48. And then Venezuela is negative 99. And Lebanon is negative 182. So, again, these were outliers. These the last two. So, it is interesting if we have one graph here. So, again, I graphed this of interest rate minus inflation rate. So, let's see. The negative here on the right, and then scroll over to the left for the country that had the highest, above inflation. So anyway, not as long as some of the other videos. I didn't have a really fun fact about inflation or interest rates. I don't know. You could argue that inflation's not fun, but anyway, if there's any future topics that you'd like me to dive into for statistics, just let me know in the comment section. Again, this is A Stats M. Hoping that you're